In our recent videos, we explored the most dangerous outlaws of the Old West. Today, we bring them all together in one place. 9 real men and women, 9 stories of violence, betrayal, and survival. This is not a Hollywood legend. This is the definitive collection of the 9 most feared outlaws of the Old West. Doc Holliday. John Henry Holliday was a walking contradiction. To the world, he was a dentist from Georgia with refined manners and a silver tongue. To the frontier, he was a ghost with a shotgun, a man who smelled of whiskey and impending funerals. The curse of the White Plague. Doc was born into a respectable family, but fate handed him a death sentence early: tuberculosis. In the 19th century, this was a slow, agonizing crawl toward the grave. His mother had died of it, and when he felt the first blood in his own cough, he knew his time was a flickering candle. He moved west for the dry air, but he didn't find a cure. He found a lifestyle that matched his internal decay. If he was going to die, he wasn't going to do it quietly in a sanitarium. He took to the gambling dens of Texas, Kansas, and Arizona. Every hand of poker was a gamble against a reaper he already knew by name. A fear born of fatalism. Why was Doc Holliday so dangerous? Because you cannot threaten a man who is already dead. In the high-stakes world of the 1880s, men fought over land, women, or money. Doc fought because he was bored and in pain. His courage wasn't bravery in the traditional sense. It was pure, unadulterated fatalism. He was known to be incredibly fast with a revolver, but his greatest weapon was his psychological edge. When he looked at an opponent, he wasn't looking at a man he might have to kill. He was looking at a man who was simply in the way of his next drink. Tombstone and the Earp Alliance. His friendship with Wyatt Earp remains one of the most debated bonds in history. Why would a straight-laced lawman link himself to a cynical, dying gambler? Perhaps Earp saw in Doc the only man he could truly trust, because Doc had no ambition. He didn't want Earp's job, his money, or his glory. He only wanted loyalty. At the OK Corral, while others were shaking with adrenaline, Doc walked into the vacant lot with a short-barreled shotgun hidden under his coat, whistling. He was the only one who seemed comfortable in the chaos. He survived the lead rain of Tombstone, the Vendetta ride, and countless brawls in Denver and Leadville. The ultimate irony. The tragedy of Doc Holliday is that he never got the warrior's death he expected. After years of dodging bullets and defying lynch mobs, he ended up in a hotel bed in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. As he lay dying at 36, he looked at his feet. He wasn't wearing his boots. He reportedly whispered, "This is funny," and closed his eyes. The man who lived for the gunfight died in the silence of a sick room. Clay Allison. If Doc Holliday was a cold scalpel, Clay Allison was a jagged axe. He wasn't an outlaw by trade, but he was a man so consumed by inner demons that the law simply couldn't contain him. A mind shattered by war. Allison was a Confederate veteran, and many historians believe he suffered from what we now call PTSD, compounded by a physical injury to his head during his youth. This created a man who could be a charming neighbor one moment and a bloodthirsty maniac the next. He didn't kill for profit. He killed because of a twisted sense of honor, or more often, because of a sheer, uncontrollable surge of adrenaline. He was the Wolf of the Washita, a man who treated violence as a form of celebration. The Legend of the Madman. The stories surrounding Allison are the stuff of nightmares. Once in a dispute with another gunman named Chunk Colbert, the two men sat down for dinner together. They ate, drank, and laughed. As Colbert reached for his gun under the table, Allison, who had been watching Colbert's reflection in a coffee pot, drew faster and shot him in the head. He then finished his meal as if nothing had happened. He was known to ride through the streets of Canadian Texas or Cimarron, New Mexico completely naked, screaming and firing his guns into the air just to see if anyone was brave enough to stop him. No one was. Even the bravest sheriffs knew that Allison didn't value his own life, which made him an impossible opponent. The darkness inside. Allison represented the psychotic element of the frontier. He wasn't a social bandit like Jesse James. He was a man who spoke to the corpses of his victims, who danced on the bars of saloons, and who once decapitated a man he suspected of murder and carried the head into a local tavern to show off. Despite his horrific reputation, he was often seen as a protector by some locals because he targeted those he deemed troublemakers. But the truth was simpler. Clay Allison just loved the fight. An unfitting end. A man like Allison should have died in a hail of bullets or at the end of a rope. Instead, his death was a cruel joke from the universe. In 1887, while driving a supply wagon, he fell from the seat. A wheel rolled over his neck, snapping it instantly. The most feared brawler in the West was taken out by a bump in the road. Tom Horn. Tom Horn was the apex predator of the Old West. While Doc was a gambler and Clay was a madman, Tom Horn was a professional. He was a man of the wilderness who turned the skills of a scout into the trade of an assassin. The Master Tracker. Before he was a killer, Horn was a hero. He was a key figure in the pursuit of Geronimo, working as a scout for the U.S. Army. He spoke Spanish and several Apache dialects. He could survive in the desert with nothing but a knife and his wits. He was a man of the earth, respected by the military and feared by his enemies. But the world changed. The Wild West began to be fenced in by powerful cattle barons. These barons didn't want law and order. They wanted their property protected. They hired Horn as a range detective, but everyone knew what that really meant. He was a state-sponsored hitman. The Ghost of the High Plains. Horn's method was terrifyingly modern. He didn't engage in quick-draw duels. He would find a high point overlooking a trail, lie still for 16 hours, and wait. When his target appeared, usually a small-time rustler or someone encroaching on the baron's land, Horn would squeeze the trigger of his .30-30 Winchester from 300 yards away. The victim would fall, and Horn would vanish. He would often leave a stone under the victim's head as a signature. He was a ghost that haunted the Wyoming range, a man who had replaced his soul with a calculation of windage and elevation. The Willie Nickel Incident. The end of the road for Horn came with the death of a child. Willie Nickel, a 14-year-old boy, was shot from ambush. The outrage was total. The civilized West could look away from the murder of rustlers, but it could not ignore the blood of a child. Horn was arrested after a questionable confession given while he was drunk. Whether he actually killed the boy or was a convenient scapegoat for the cattle barons who wanted to clean their hands is still debated by historians today. The Last Walk. On the day he was hanged in 1903, Tom Horn was the calmest man in the room. He watched the officials prepare the gallows, a water-powered mechanism, with a cold, analytical gaze. He had lived by the silence of the rifle, and he died with the same chilling silence. His death marked the true end of the Old West. The era of the scout was over. The era of the lawyer had begun. John Wesley Hardin. The man who killed because someone snored too loudly. John Wesley Hardin was born in 1853 in Texas, a land marked by wars, racism, and the chaos following the Civil War. His father was a preacher, a religious man. But even that couldn't save young John from the brutality that surrounded him. Texas was a territory where an argument could end in bloodshed, where justice depended on who drew fastest, and Hardin grew up seeing that every day. By age 14, he already carried a gun. By 15, he had already killed a man. Hardin later claimed he shot in self-defense, but the records from the time tell a very different story, that he killed an older man without clear provocation. It was the beginning of a life marked by death. From that point on, Hardin became a whirlwind. In less than 5 years, he was involved in over a dozen killings, many for absurd reasons. The most famous case occurred in a hotel. A guest was snoring too loudly. Hardin, annoyed, took his pistol and fired through the wall. The man died instantly. By the time the police arrived, Hardin had already escaped. This was not an honorable duelist. He was not an elegant gunslinger. He was an impulsive killer, capable of murdering over a gesture, a word, or a noise. The Texas Rangers, the most feared law enforcement body on the frontier, began pursuing him obsessively. Hardin, however, seemed to have 9 lives. He jumped from moving trains. He changed identities. He rode for days without rest. He was an armed ghost. But a ghost cannot run forever. In 1877, the Rangers finally cornered him. Hardin tried to draw, but this time, he wasn't fast enough. He was arrested, beaten, and dragged away in chains. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In prison, he read law books, studied, and became quiet, perhaps for the first time in his life. In 1895, he was released from jail. He tried to earn a living as a lawyer. But you can't escape the West, or the past. He was murdered by a shot to the back of the head while playing dice in a bar. The most feared man in Texas died without even seeing his killer. Billy the Kid. The young man who smiled before pulling the trigger. Before becoming an elusive ghost, Billy the Kid was simply Henry McCarty, a thin, shy, and very intelligent boy. His mother, Catherine, was the light of his life. But tuberculosis killed her when Henry was barely 14 years old. That day, the boy's world completely collapsed. No family, no money, no home. In the West, that was equivalent to a death sentence. But Henry had something other boys didn't. Absolute determination to survive, no matter the price. Billy was an enigma. In the saloons, it was said he had impeccable manners, that he helped wash dishes to get food, that he was polite, joking, charming. But if you provoked him, if you threatened a friend of his, if you tried to take the little he had, then the kid appeared. He drew so fast that some claimed you didn't even see his hand move. Others said he shot with both hands and never missed. The kind smile vanished. His gaze hardened. And before you was no longer a boy, there was a predator. In 1878, the New Mexico Territory was ablaze in a brutal conflict. The Lincoln County War, ranchers, merchants, corrupt politicians, all fighting for power. Billy joined a group called the Regulators. And there, in that chaos of ambushes, chases, and selective killings, Billy stopped being Henry McCarty and became Billy the Kid. He was fast, audacious, unpredictable. He could enter an enemy settlement, shoot, disappear, and reappear from behind. He seemed to move with the desert, as if the wind covered him. Newspapers began to talk about a young killer, impossible to catch. An armed specter. In a confrontation against Sheriff William Brady, Billy killed 2 men from the opposing side. For many, it was justice in a war without rules. For the law, it was an unforgivable murder. That day, Billy stopped being a soldier within a local conflict and became a recognized fugitive throughout the territory. In 1881, Pat Garrett, an old friend, achieved what no one had achieved in years, capturing Billy the Kid. He was taken to the Lincoln jail. 2 guards watched him day and night. The entire town awaited his execution. Everyone thought the kid had finally met his end. But they were underestimating the ghost. Billy pretends to struggle with his handcuffs. A guard approaches. Billy takes advantage of a lapse. He strikes the guard, grabs his weapon, and fires. He races down the stairs, handcuffed, shouting orders to confuse the others. A second guard runs toward the window. Billy sees him, aims, and fires from the staircase. The guard falls dead. Billy breaks the chains, grabs a rifle, and before leaving, he walks slowly down the main street, looking up at the tower where they might shoot him. But no one does. People saw the kid as a force of nature, not just a simple criminal. Billy mounts a horse and escapes. The citizens couldn't believe it. They said Billy was born with divine luck, that bullets respected him, that death wanted him, but couldn't catch him. Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked the boy's every step. In Fort Sumner, he entered a dark room, saw a silhouette, and fired without asking. Billy fell to the floor. A single shot. No duel. No chance. No glory. Thus died the young man who had defied the entire New Mexico Territory. 21 years old, a young corpse, and an eternal legend. Jesse James. To understand Jesse James, we must first forget everything Hollywood told about him. He was not a hero, he was not a Robin Hood, and he was not even an elegant thief. Jesse James was, from his origins, a product of war, hate, and the crudest violence. Missouri was a battlefield even before the Civil War officially began. Pro-slavery gangs and abolitionist groups clashed on roads, farms, and small towns. And young Jesse, barely a teenager, grew up breathing that atmosphere. His home was constantly visited by armed guerrillas. His mother, a fanatical Confederate, fed rebel soldiers and offered them refuge. Jesse saw rifles on the dining room table, pistols hanging in the kitchen, blood-stained uniforms being washed in the yard. That was his world. Jesse was only 16 when he joined the Bushwhackers, one of the most violent guerrillas of the conflict. These groups didn't fight like an honorable army. They attacked by surprise, burned farms, executed prisoners. It was dirty warfare, without rules. The guerrilla captain saw something dangerous in Jesse. Coldness. He didn't hesitate. He didn't tremble. He didn't question. They taught him to ride a horse as if it were an extension of his body, to shoot from the saddle without stopping, to dismount, roll on the ground and shoot from behind a rock, to vanish into the trees. When the war ended, Reconstruction began for many Americans. For Jesse, the void began. Peace was unbearable to him. He didn't belong in that world. He had seen too much blood. He had learned to solve everything with violence. And above all, he felt that the North had humiliated his people. The war was over, but Jesse James did not stop. He had accumulated rage, a deep resentment, the feeling that the world owed him something. Jesse teamed up with his brother Frank and the younger brothers, also former guerrillas. Tough people, cold-blooded, soldiers without a war. Together they formed the most dangerous gang in the country. Jesse James died without seeing the face of his killer. His body slumped to the floor, without time for a final gesture. No duel, no poetic justice. The legend of the Robin Hood of the West collapsed. The real story was laid bare. Jesse James did not die a hero.
Butch Cassidy. Robert Leroy Parker, better known to history as Butch Cassidy, was a ghost in the machine of the frontier. To look at him, you wouldn't see the jagged edges of a killer. He didn't have the cold, dead eyes of a psychopath. He didn't scream demands. He didn't threaten civilians for sport. And perhaps most uniquely for an outlaw of his era, he didn't shoot first. While his contemporaries, men like the Daltons or Billy the Kid, relied entirely on the mechanical speed of their revolvers and the brute force of intimidation, Butch relied on something much rarer in the Wild West: planning. From a young age, working the hard ranch lands of Utah, Butch understood a fundamental truth that evaded most criminals. Violence attracts attention. Gunshots are loud, they echo across canyons and alert the law. Dead bodies bring heat. They bring vengeful relatives, angry mobs, and relentless federal marshals. Killing was messy. Killing was bad for business. So, Butch Cassidy decided to rewrite the rules of robbery. He approached crime not as an act of aggression, but as a logistical puzzle. He became an architect of theft. Before the Wild Bunch ever drew a weapon, the work was already done. Butch would spend weeks, sometimes months, studying a target bank. He learned the names of the tellers. He memorized the shift changes of the guards. He watched the trains to understand the rhythm of the rails. But his genius lay in the escape. While other gangs rode their horses until the animals collapsed, praying they could outrun the posse, Butch engineered his getaways. He established a network of supply caches and relay stations hidden deep in the unforgiving terrain of the Hole in the Wall, or Robber's Roost. He placed fresh, rested horses at strategic intervals miles away from the crime scene. When the robbery happened, it was surgical. It was a blur. By the time the town realized they had been hit, the dust was already settling. The posse would chase them, only to find their own horses exhausted, while Butch and his men mounted fresh steeds and vanished into the labyrinth of red rocks. He didn't seek infamy in the way others did. He didn't want his face on a poster. He wanted to disappear with the money. Over time, this philosophy attracted a specific caliber of criminal. He gathered men who were like him, patient, disciplined, and intelligent. This was the birth of the Wild Bunch, perhaps the most slippery and professional criminal organization the West had ever seen. At his right hand was the Sundance Kid. If Butch was the brain, Sundance was the mechanism. A man of few words, Sundance was lethal, precise, and almost invisible until the moment he was needed. Butch thought. Sundance executed. Together, they orchestrated a symphony of theft. They robbed the Union Pacific trains and raided banks across arguably 3 different countries, often without spilling a single drop of blood. They embarrassed sheriffs. They outwitted the prestigious Pinkerton Detective Agency. They humiliated the railroad tycoons who believed their steel safes were impenetrable. But time is an enemy you cannot rob. The 20th century was encroaching on the frontier. The open range was being fenced off. The telegraph wires were stringing the country together, allowing a sheriff in Nevada to communicate instantly with a marshal in Wyoming. The world was shrinking. The rewards on their heads grew astronomical, funded by powerful corporate interests. Butch Cassidy was the first to realize the hard truth. The Old West was dying. The days of the horseback outlaw were numbered. While others stayed and died in futile shootouts, Butch made an unthinkable decision. he chose to run. He looked at the map and saw that the United States had no more shadows left to hide in. So, he, Sundance, and Etta Place boarded a steamship. They crossed oceans, seeking the rugged landscapes of South America, Argentina, Bolivia, places where the law was still slow and the terrain was still wild. His end remains one of history's great question marks. The official story tells of a shootout in San Vicente, Bolivia. Trapped by the Bolivian army, outgunned and wounded, the two legends supposedly took their own lives rather than surrender. But there were no cameras. The bodies were buried in unmarked graves. Some swear he survived. Tales persisted for decades of an old man in the American Northwest, living a quiet life, fixing machines, carrying the secret of a past life. Perhaps that was his greatest heist of all. Butch Cassidy didn't just steal money, he stole a clear ending from history. Belle Starr. In a narrative almost exclusively written by and about men, Belle Starr carved out her own chapter with a knife. She didn't ask for permission to enter the criminal underworld. She simply took her seat at the head of the table. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, she was a woman of contradictions. She was educated, a talented pianist, and came from a well-to-do family. Yet she found her calling in the dust and grime of the frontier. Belle understood the gender dynamics of her time better than anyone. She knew she couldn't rely on brute strength to intimidate a room full of drunken bandits. Instead, she relied on intellect and connections. She wasn't a reckless gunfighter blazing away in the street. She was something far more dangerous. She was the Nexus. Belle realized early on that in a land of fugitives, information is the ultimate power. She knew who had robbed the stagecoach. She knew who was planning to betray their gang leader. She knew which caves the most wanted men in America were sleeping in, and she leveraged every scrap of that knowledge. She cultivated a visual brand that commanded respect. She rode side saddle, but dressed in black velvet, wearing plumed hats and carrying 2 pistols. She spoke with the confidence of someone who feared no consequences. To some, she was a bandit queen, a romantic figure aiding the resistance against Northern Reconstruction. To others, she was a menace, a petticoat terror. Her home in the Indian Territory became a sanctuary, a sort of neutral ground for the underworld. It was a place where robberies were planned over dinner, where alliances between rival gangs were negotiated, and where vengeance was plotted. Men like Jesse James and the Younger brothers were known to associate with her. She didn't need to pull the trigger to be the most feared person in the room. She just needed to nod her head. But living on the razor's edge takes a toll. Her life was a constant oscillation between control and chaos. She married outlaws, and she buried them. She was arrested for horse theft, serving time in federal prison, only to emerge more notorious than before. She was betrayed by lovers and sold out by friends. Yet she always returned to the game. However, the West has a way of silencing those who know too much. On February 3, 1889, Belle was riding home alone. She was 2 days short of her 41st birthday. She was eating a piece of cornbread, relaxed, riding through the mud of a rural road. There was no duel. There was no stand and deliver. An assassin lay in wait in the bushes. A shotgun blast knocked her from her horse. As she lay in the mud, struggling to breathe, the killer walked up and fired a second execution-style shot. The killer was never identified. It could have been a neighbor she feuded with, a spurned lover, or perhaps her own son. The silence that followed that shotgun blast was absolute. Belle Starr died as she lived, outside the bounds of the law. No trial, no justice, no explanation. She was the queen of the outlaws, and she took her secrets to the grave, leaving behind a legacy that blurred the line between a criminal mastermind and a victim of a brutal world. Sam Bass. If Butch Cassidy was the brain and Belle Starr was the connector, Sam Bass was the ego. His story is the quintessential tragedy of the American outlaw. He began like so many others, an orphan boy, an ambitious farmhand, a charismatic youth drifting from Indiana to Texas. He was likable, he was friendly, and he was convinced that destiny owed him a fortune. At first, the universe seemed to agree with him. Sam found his way into the bandit life almost by accident, but he had a knack for it. His early robberies were clean, the scores were quick, the money was easy. But his crowning achievement came in Nebraska, where he and his gang pulled off the Big Springs robbery of a Union Pacific train. They walked away with $60,000 in gold coins, a staggering fortune in 1877. This should have been the moment Sam Bass disappeared. He had the money to retire, to vanish, to start a new life anywhere in the world. But Sam Bass enjoyed the fame too much. While seasoned outlaws stayed in the shadows, Sam basked in the light. He returned to Texas and spent his gold freely. He tipped generously. He bought rounds for the bar. He loved being recognized as the man who beat the Union Pacific. He was building a legend of a Robin Hood, a good-natured thief who only stole from the rich. But Sam failed to understand the most basic rule of survival in the West. The higher you fly, the easier you are to shoot. Every robbery he committed increased his confidence, but it also increased the desperation of the law. The Texas Rangers were not amused by his celebrity status. The governor of Texas was embarrassed. The Pinkertons were relentless. As the pressure mounted, the Bass Gang began to crack. The circle of trust grew smaller. And in a world driven by greed, loyalty has a price tag. Jim Murphy, a member of the gang, turned informant. He traded Sam's life for his own freedom. The end came at Round Rock, Texas. Sam thought he was walking into a simple bank robbery. He believed he was still in control, still the golden boy of the frontier. He didn't know the town was crawling with rangers waiting for his arrival. As Sam and his men stepped out to buy tobacco, the trap snapped shut. Gunfire erupted from the barber shop, the livery stable, the street corners. It was chaos. Bullets kicked up the dust, shattering glass and bone. Sam Bass took a heavy slug to the torso. He managed to mount his horse and ride out of town, clinging to life. But the wound was mortal. He was found the next day, lying under a tree in a pasture, dying a slow, agonizing death. As he lay there, fading in and out of consciousness, the charisma and the gold meant nothing. He was just a boy, far from home, bleeding into the Texas dirt. "The world is bobbing around me," he reportedly said. He died on his 27th birthday. Sam Bass wasn't killed because he lacked talent with a gun. He wasn't killed because he was unlucky. He was killed by his own hubris. He was the outlaw who believed the rules didn't apply to him, until the moment they crushed him. They are the ghosts of a vanishing world. Here, there were no heroes, only those who dared to defy the inevitable, and those who fell the hardest.